Well, the Colorado Rockies baseball season rolls on after a disappointing two-game set against the Houston Astros. The Rockies will take their show on the road, or continue it on the road, I should add, as they have a three-game series against maybe the only team in baseball that is worse than the Rockies, which is the Chicago White Sox. We'll break it all down. And what's up with the Rockies on today's Locked On Rockies podcast?
You are Locked On Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into your Locked On Rockies podcast, everybody. I am Aniello, Piro, your fill-in host in place of our guy, Paul Holden, who will be back next week and doing his thing right here on the Locked On Rockies podcast. And I am joined today by a special guest, my friend, my colleague here at Mile High Sports. His name is Alex Becker. He's one of our radio producer extraordinaires back here, but also a baseball fan and a Rockies fan. So figured this would be a good opportunity to chat some balls and strikes with you, my friend. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, AP. Thanks for having me on. Tough year for the Rockies, but hey, let's get into it.
There's always something to talk about with them. And of course, guys, this is the Locked On Rockies podcast, Locked On Sports, your team every day. Be sure to check us out. And if you want more Rockies content, make sure to subscribe to that Locked On Denver Sports YouTube channel, where I am the regular host of the Locked On Rockies postcast. And if you're wondering what a postcast is, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. We're going to go live on that YouTube channel, the Locked On Denver Sports channel, and we'll talk about the game that was after it happened. So make sure to subscribe. And again, Locked On at Denver Sports YouTube channel if you want some additional Rockies content. But Alex, before we get into the bad, because there's a lot of bad to talk about with this team, let's backtrack a little bit, because I know that you've been talking about the Rockies. You've been a fan. You've watched them and heard about them for a long time. Look, we knew they were going to be bad this season, but what was your overall expectation for the Rockies entering into this season?
Overall expectation, it wasn't very high. I thought another 100 loss season was probably in the cards after suffering their first 100 loss season last year. They didn't improve the team a whole lot. The bullpen we knew was going to be shaky, and your superstar Chris Bryant can't get on the field. Honestly, the expectations weren't very high. A fifth place finish was almost all but certain. So I would say maybe not losing 100 games would be a success. You could say for the Rockies this year. But not a whole lot there before the season that I was excited about.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. And I sat in this very seat with our guy, Drew Creasman, for a Mile High Sports video earlier this year, and I had talked about with him, like, the same question. And I think for me, though, and it's kind of hard to look at it this way when they're as bad as they are currently, it does feel like this season at least has a little bit more of an identity than maybe last year. Like, it felt like, to your point, their first 100 loss season in franchise history. They're probably going to do that again, this season and whatnot. But at least this year, you're seeing some of that youth movement take hold. You're seeing Ezekiel Tovar, you're stepping up. You're seeing Ryan McMahon, solidify himself as a pretty productive everyday player. It feels like there's just a little bit more meat on the bone with this Rockies team this season, despite the fact that maybe the results haven't been there from a wins and losses perspective.
That's very true, that they are bringing up the prospects earlier than they normally would. We saw Amador come up a couple weeks ago when Rogers went on the IL. Guys like Hunter Goodman making a position change. So they are really buying into the youth movement a little bit more than they were last year. That's been good to see with the team. You like to see those young kids be given a shot and see what they can do at the major league level, because some of these veterans, we know what they are. They're injured a lot. They're kind of just hanging on. So I'd like to see those kids in their young 20s who are doing well at AA and AAA get a shot in the major leagues. And, we've seen that with Amador and Goodman, and like Toglia's getting a lot of playing time lately. So I agree with you. There's more of a direction in the philosophy this year.
Yeah, and it's growing pains, right? And I'll save this for the end of the show, but I'm going to ask you, so I guess it's not the big tease, but you can simmer on this thought for a little bit. Like, what is your definition of success for the Rockies this season? Because, like, it's hard to say success is wins and losses, or the wins, because they're few and far between right now. But to your point, like, you're getting this youth movement started, you're getting the ball rolling in that direction. So we shall see. But with what we're seeing with the Rockies right now, they had a winning month of May. A game above 500, so it is technically winning, but that's pretty darn good by their standards. But what do you think has led to them kind of falling off here in the month of June?
The bullpen continues to struggle. They really have one reliable reliever, maybe in the entire bullpen, Jalen Beeks. They've Vodnik at times because their starting pitching has actually been pretty decent most of the year. Quantrill's been fantastic, but they can't hit. And they're really struggling to score on the road, to come up with the big clutch hit late in the game. Offense is no good. I mean, the last, I think, 3 games, they've scored 4 runs combined, and just the wheels are falling off offensively. I don't know. They can't seem to do 2 things well at once. If they're pitching well, they're not going to hit. If they're slugging, the bullpen, implodes. They can't put a complete game together, and it's been a really tough month of June. They're just sliding further in the standings, and I'm not sure if it's going to get better.
Yeah, I'm with you on that front. Unfortunately, it just kind of seems like they're down and out right now. And the weird thing for me is the lack of synergy. You kind of hit on it there. Like, we know the pitching has been a disaster, historically for this organization. The bullpen's always been bad. The starting pitching's been a little up and down, but the lineup has been very, very bad and really hot and cold for this team, over the last 3 or 4 weeks or so. And look, I get that Charlie Blackmon doesn't play every day right now. You mentioned it, Chris Bryant. I don't even know if I want to call him a superstar, a former superstar. I don't know what has happened to him. Elias Diaz is on the injured list right now, but, they're still just unable. Like, what's up with Nolan Jones? Like, I know he was, banged up a little bit there on the injured list, but hitting has always come pretty naturally to this Rockies club, and that has not been the case, for the most part this season.
Not at all. They're really only getting production from about 4 guys. The top half of the lineup, Tovar and McMahon, like you said earlier, they've been swinging it well. Doyle's been a pleasant surprise offensively this year. But the second half of the lineup, I mean, how many guys do they have hitting under 200? Nolan Jones is under 200. Goodman, Tolia as well. So a lot of the everyday players are not hitting much at all. Maybe 2 or 3 bright spots in the lineup. Blackman's on the injured list right now as well. So if they're not hitting 1 through 9, and it's only Tovar and McMahon every single game, and Rogers here and there, I guess, but they're not getting any production really from hitters 5 through 9 in the lineup.
Yeah, and that's just not a recipe for success. I mean, it seems like Ezequiel Tovar is the one player that has been consistent for the most part with this Rockies club, offensively, hitting right around 290. The power's been there. The doubles have been there. But Nolan Jones, as we talked about, a guy that we're used to kind of being a mainstay in the lineup. Eleris Montero can't figure it out. I mean, it's just like, it's almost like you're playing roulette when Buddy Black puts this lineup together, because it's like, okay, like, let's move Rogers up, let's move this person down. But like, it doesn't matter how you reconfigure this lineup right now. The Rockies just aren't getting results, period.
They're not. It's been tough to see. Nolan Jones is a very confusing one to me. I thought he was projected to have a great year. They're hitting him in the 3 spot to start the season. All these expectations coming out of spring training, and he's been bad in the field too. He's not just bad at the plate. He's struggling out in left field. I mean, they're DHing him half the time now. And this lineup, and they strike out way too much too. Even Tovar and McMahon, probably their 2 best hitters this year. They're striking out at an alarming rate, and Tovar's not walking much either. I think he only has 13 walks on the entire season. So although his average is way up, his on-base percentage is only about 315 right now. So even with the top guys, there's some complaints there as well. And the power has always been a problem. I think they're in the bottom half of the league in home runs this year. For a team that plays at altitude, that should never happen. So they're striking out too much, and they can't hit the ball out of the ballpark enough.
The Rockies struck out 14 times yesterday. We're recording this on Thursday, June the 27th. So in that series finale against the Houston Astros, 14 times. And it was Spencer Arrighetti on the mound for the starting pitcher for the Houston Astros. He entered into that series with an ERA, I believe, of 6.84. His ERA dropped an entire point. It's like 5.8 something right now, because the Rockies made him look like Justin Verlander, vintage, like Cy Young candidate Spencer Arrighetti. I mean, it's crazy. And I don't know if it's like the lack of quality at bats, maybe just hitting the ball, right to players or whatever it might be. But whichever way you slice it with this Rockies club right now, offensively, because like I said, they're going to struggle with the pitching. The starting pitching is going to be up and down. The bullpen's going to be a mess. It's when the lineup looks Bush League that, to me, is the cause for concern of like, what the heck's going on? You mentioned it. There's no reason that a team that plays half of its games at altitude should be anywhere near the bottom third of the league in run production.
Absolutely not. It's sad. It's been a problem for a couple years too. I think Chris Bryant was counted on to to supply some power and hit 25 home runs per year. It's been the opposite of that. And I'm just so used to a team that, like you said, they're going to score at home big time, and they're going to come up with some big home runs late in the game. That's not the case at all. I think McMahon leads the team with 14 home runs, but they just don't have enough pop.
Consistency.
No consistency.
They'll put up, 10 runs in a game at home, but then they'll follow it up with 1 run the next day.
Right.
It
doesn't carry over.
So we shall see. All right, let's hit our first break, though. When we come back, let's continue along with the conversation. Want to dive into Ezequiel Tovar. I also have not spent a good amount of time, whether filling in this week for Paul or even on the Locked On Rockies postcast, doing a little bit of a deep dive on the Chris Bryant situation. I know that's something that all Rockies fans loathe and whatnot, but with the trade deadline coming up, decision time coming up, I think it's worth to have the conversation a little bit. So let's hit a quick break. We'll come back and do just that right here on your Locked On Rockies podcast. Stick with us. All right, real quick, guys, let me tell you about our friends over at Tax Network USA, because here on the Locked On Rockies podcast, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news for your teams, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It's year-round. We get it, folks. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Woohoo! Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for your unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals at Tax Experts and Tax Network USA go to bat for you. And I say this every time I do this read. My tax return is lost. The state doesn't know where it is. The people who I filed my taxes don't know where it is. So now I'm having to jump through all these hula hoops. I'm going to go talk to my friends over at Tax Network USA, because with over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, not A-, not A+, A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. That's billion with a B. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, because yes, you do need to file taxes on parlay winnings over a certain threshold. Call our friends at Tax Network USA at 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. You can also see the link in this episode description below, but check them out at tnusa.com/lockedon or give them a call at 1-800-549-1000. All right, and let me also tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors here real quick, guys, because passion, drive, and patience, it is the formula for winning championships. It is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has become everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions, they do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Check them out, eBay Motors. All right, and welcome on back into your Locked On Rockies podcast. I am your fill-in host, Aniello Piro. You can follow me on social media at Media by AP if your heart desires. And I'm joined by the great Alex Becker, kind enough to give me a few minutes of his time today as we chat Rockies right here on the Locked On Rockies podcast. Alex, where can they find you on social?
You can find me on Twitter at @BeckerSports. So
Becker Sports.
Pretty easy to find.
Very simple. So be sure to check him out there. Again, he's one of our great radio producers. So for those of you that maybe aren't super familiar with Mile High Sports, or maybe you are, Alex is in charge of producing a majority of our morning shows. So guys like Eric Goodman and Bruce Hurdle, Gil Whiteley, the Smile High Morning Show with Danny and Jeff, David Hurlbutt with the Morning Huddle as well. Alex is responsible for all of that. And while we're just kind of, introducing you to the audience and whatnot, you have a pretty solid footprint in the youth sports community in the high school level as well, right?
Yeah, I do a lot of play-by-play for high school sports, some college as well, but high school football, high school basketball, I say those are probably the two big ones. And I've gotten to see some good athletes, at the high school level the past few years go on and play major college sports and even into the pros. So that's probably the coolest part, I'd say, is calling these kids high school games and then see them go play in the, major college football or major college basketball, and then maybe even further than that.
Well, I think I know this isn't baseball related, but Dalton Connect is someone that I believe, I don't want to say you have a relationship with, but you saw him from afar because where's he from? What high school did he go
So
to?
he went to Prairie View High School. It's up in the Thornton Brighton area.
Yeah.
So he was real local. He was same grade as my younger brother. So I actually got to see him in high school, and he was not he was a little like 5'11" kid, late growth spurt type deal. So got to see him in his infant stages. And he reminds me a lot of Derek White in that he was a late bloomer, very late bloomer. Almost no D1 offers out of high school, and then really found a growth spurt late in college.
Well, and unfortunately, he was drafted by the Los Angeles Lakers. So I think all of us here in Colorado want to see Dalton Connect succeed on an individual level, but I don't think we want his team to succeed because we do not like the Lakers here. But I do want to ask you this as well, because you played high school baseball.
I did.
How do you think the Rockies, because as did I, and I know that, the Rockies as an organization, weren't around, for a lot of these older folks when they were in high school, right? Like I talked to the Terry Fries of the world or the Les Shapiros of the world, right? And professional baseball just was not a thing in the state of Colorado for some time. Have you seen or felt any of the impact from the Rockies in the community going back to when you were a kid coming up playing ball and now, where you are today, still doing some stuff in the high school ranks?
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, they have a whole developmental program. They have like a Rockies scout team where they take the best high school kids. They'll put them on a select team in the fall, and it's Rockies affiliated. I think one of the Monforts is actually an assistant coach. So they really do a good job through the youth system and getting kids through high school. And, I've been a part of that. I remember I was a part of like the Rockies Rookies fan club when I was 5 or 6 years old, getting to run the bases around after the game and all that. So they've done a really good job in the community. With helping youth baseball and getting more kids out playing. And I think we've seen that with more high school kids from Colorado get drafted and playing Division I college baseball.
Well, and the reason that I bring that up is because, look, the Rockies don't really get many passing grades for their performance on the field, but off the field, the Rockies are an A+ organization. They do a great job in the community. The ballpark is fantastic. The people that work there love to work there. It's just so often when I'm doing these shows or when I'm doing the postcast or with Paul or whatever, like it tends to be pretty negative, right? Because we're focused on what's going on now with the team. But I think you're in a unique position to have experienced the stuff that the Rockies have contributed beyond the X's and O's, beyond the wins and the losses on the diamond. So I think it's worthwhile to mention that. So let's get back on track, though, with the current state of the team, because I said it on yesterday's show. If the Rockies lose this upcoming series to the Chicago White Sox, who are I don't know what Miami's record is off the top of my head.
They're like a couple games better than the Rockies.
Rockies, White Sox, Marlins.
Yes.
The 3 worst records in Major League Baseball. And I believe the White Sox have something like 5 or 6 losses less than the Rockies. If the Rockies are unable to go into Chicago, where there's going to be about 12 fans in the stands, if they cannot win 2 out of the 3 games in this series, I'm not saying they have to sweep, but if they can't win this series, they're the worst team in baseball, Alex.
I think that's a fair statement. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't count on him winning the series. The Rockies, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they did drop 2 out of 3 in Chicago or even get swept. That wouldn't be a shock at all. But I think it's fair to say you're going head to head. You're going toe to toe with your other fellow worst team in their respective league. And if you cannot beat the White Sox, I think it's a total fair statement to say the Rockies are 30th out of 30.
And it's unfortunate because the White Sox are bad, but like the Rockies, like also right now are just awful. And I think Cal Quantrill is lined up to have a start in this series. Cal Freeland as well, who has an ERA of over 9 right now. But like I mentioned it after yesterday's show or during yesterday's postcast show, that series against the Astros, that is like a team meeting type of series because you were totally non-competitive in any of those games. And that's after you went 3-7 on a season-long 10-game homestand, with series losses to the Pirates and the Nationals and the Dodgers. Like you expect the Dodgers, but the Nationals and the Pirates, I mean, come on, guys. And to follow that up with 2 non-competitive games against the Astros. Look, I know we're getting towards the dog days of summer here, but the Rockies in the last, week or so have looked borderline lifeless.
That's a good way to put it, non-competitive, because that's exactly what they were. 5 runs in the first inning in game 1 and kind of more of the same yesterday. They've had terrible luck against the Astros this year, 0-4. They lost the 2 in Mexico City earlier in the season. But, I'd say they're pretty non-competitive right now. And We against a team like the Astros, who's been I think 7 straight LCS. That's really where it shows up. And one of their beat writers yesterday, Brian McTaggart, I think tweeted during the game, "Rockies are a tough watch," and I was like, I couldn't say it better than myself, because that's a national writer who doesn't get to see much of the team, and then they come into Houston and like, oh boy, like this team has a lot of holes.
It's brutal.
They have their work cut out for them. It's real bad right now, and the one team worse than them coming up this week, and we'll see how they fare.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I said on the postcast yesterday too, like I could have just copy and pasted Tuesday's show into Wednesdays, and it would have held up just fine, because it's like they don't score any runs until the 8th of the 9th inning, and at that point you're down and out. And it's funny because like at this point, like if you're a Rockies player or fan or commentator, whatever it might be, like a starting pitcher getting to the 5th inning and only allowing 4 runs is like very good for them at this point in the season,
right?
Which
Quality
is like
start,
mid for every other team. And it's just so interesting that, to your point that you made earlier, it's like, well, the pitching will do, because who was it? Dakota Hudson, I believe, yesterday. He actually had a pretty good start. And I forget who, I think it was Feltner yesterday and Hudson, whatever it is. The Rockies starting pitching was actually fine in this series. It was the offense that let him down. So now I'm expecting bad pitching and good offense, because that's just how it goes with this Rockies club. So we shall see how this plays out. But let's hit our final break. And when we come back, we will put a bow on the show. Got my guy, Alex Becker, sitting in with me here on the Locked On Rockies podcast. Stick with us, and we'll continue along with the conversation when we come back right here on the show. All right, let me tell you about our friends over at Booking.com real quick, because this episode of the Locked On Rockies podcast is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.com. Yeah, I'm supposed to say that. I'm excited. I've been like listening to the Booking.com ads my entire life. But with summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you have always secretly wanted to learn about. Yes, we're talking about your rivals' cities, with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rivals city. And here's an example. A New York fan is heading to Boston to catch a baseball game on Boston's turf. Who wants their team to win, but they're also excited to have a lobster roll and fall in love with the city of Boston? They're going to get their stuff taken care of through our friends over at Booking.com, excuse me. And I was just in Chicago. I probably should have gone through Booking.com to get my hotel, because let me tell you, it was a disaster. And that's the beauty of our friends over at Booking.com, guys, because they are the pros. They have been doing this for decades now. They've got it down to a T. They've got it down to a science. So if you've got an upcoming trip this summer, 4th of July is right around the corner. August is a busy month. September, get those vacations in before the kids go back to school. You're going to want to book your trip through our friends over at Booking.com. And again, today's episode of the Locked On Rockies podcast is brought to you by them. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. All right, and let me also tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn here real quick, because are you struggling to close deals? Selling is tougher than ever, and that's why I want to tell you about the LinkedIn Sales Navigator. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a sales intelligence platform that helps professionals effectively prospect and engage high-value customers, drive higher revenue, and increase sales performances. Sales Navigator helps you target the right buyers, surface key signals such as job changes or which accounts you should prioritize, and shows you hidden allies so you can find those buyers that are most likely to convert. Fueled by LinkedIn's 1 billion member platform, Sales Navigator gives you the most up-to-date first-party data, enabling you to unlock conversations with the people that matter. Right now, you can try LinkedIn Sales Navigator and get a 60-day free trial at linkedin.com/lockedon. That is linkedin.com/lockedon for a 60-day free trial. Let LinkedIn Sales Navigator help you sell like a superstar today. Just go to linkedin.com/lockedon and get started, and let them know that the Locked On Rockies podcast sent you. All right, welcome on back into your Locked On Rockies podcast. I am your fill-in host, Aniello Piro. We got Alex Becker sitting in with me for a few more minutes here, and we were talking about this upcoming series against the Chicago White Sox, and I think it's definitely a gut check time for the Rockies, because we had talked about it early in the first segment about how, you know, maybe there's some identity, there's some definition to this season, maybe more so than compared to years past. But if you can't go in there and figure out a way to win this series against Chicago, like I said, worst team in baseball. And maybe from there things spiral out of control. But I do think it's important for the little bit of a youth movement that they started to show that they can bounce back and roll off some tough losses.
Yeah, I agree. They got to be fed up in that clubhouse the way they're playing, especially some of the veterans. I can't imagine. I don't know. Charlie Blackmon's on the IL, but he's got to be just done with this. Just another losing season with not much hope. It is gut check time if there ever was one against the White Sox here. Hopefully they can start to play some good baseball. We saw the 7-game win streak earlier. That was fun, but then right after that, they went into a tailspin right after. So
that's right when I started doing the postcast. So maybe I'm the bad luck.
Hey, there's been a lot of bad luck, I think, for the Rockies this year, but gut check time is a very good way to put it. And, just hoping for some good signs. Maybe a guy or two in the bullpen can emerge and get some good innings. But hopefully, they can get on the right track. And if they can't do it against the White Sox, who are they going to do it against?
That's how I look at it as well, my friend. So let's transition a little bit because I teased it earlier in the show and I want to dive into it. What the heck is going on with Kris Bryant, man? And look, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but is this the worst signing in Major League Baseball in a long time? I mean, because it's given me shades of Anthony Rendon with the Angels. It's giving me shades of Pablo Sandoval with the Red Sox. It's giving me shades of Jason Bay with the Mets, Chris Davis with the Orioles, although that was more of a retention signing. But you want to talk about a signing that has just not worked out at all. And even when he's healthy, I know he's on the injured list right now, he's borderline unplayable because of how bad he's been at the plate. I mean, I just don't know what to make of this. What say you?
I'm with you. Those are some really good comparisons too for worst signings. And one of his old Cubs teammates, Javi Baez with Detroit. I think that's another terrible one. It's almost to me after this last IL trip to the IL, his 7th one since he's been in a Rockies uniform. I'm thinking this guy's almost sabotaging himself to where he wants to get released. Like, how many times can I go on the injured list and stay on the injured list as long as possible before they just outright release me? He had those comments in the offseason saying he kind of regrets signing that 7-year, $182 million contract with the Rockies. I mean, he's turning in a 2-week injury into a month-long injury, and he's having these frequent IL stints over and over. It's always the back. It almost seems to me like, how many times can he do this before the Rockies just outright release him?
I don't think they will, though. I don't think they can afford to do that.
Yeah. I want to know if the Rockies were competitive, if he would be making all these IL trips to the IL, because I'm thinking no.
I agree. And maybe, look, I don't want to hold injuries against any player, but when you're not competitive, that urge to get back isn't there. So maybe it's less of they're not good. Let me come up with something to put me on the IL. But maybe it's just hey, I am a little banged up. But maybe it's the psychology of well, this team isn't good. What's the rush for me to have to come back? Oh, maybe it does hurt a little bit more than it, just trying to get back to complete 100% because he's still getting paid one way or the other.
Yeah.
Whether he's on the IL or not, he's still going to collect his checks from the organization. And so it's just frustrating for the fans because you trade away Nolan Arenado because he wanted out. It was not a money thing necessarily. And then you go turn around and spend all this money on a guy in Kris Bryant who was fine with the Giants, obviously a folk hero with the Cubs. And then you get I don't even know what you want to call him. I'm trying to think of something like Grizz Bryant or something like that. This is not Kris Bryant. This is his alter ego that we're getting right now. Borderline unplayable.
He's just a shell. He is unplayable. It's just a shell of what he was in Chicago. He's mailed it in. He's totally mailed it in. Doesn't care anymore. He's got the bag. Can you believe this guy won an MVP and Rookie of the Year within the last 10 years? This guy is not at all, even in that consideration of elite ball players. Just to think that we were having that Arenado versus Kris Bryant third base comparison not too long ago. It's he's fallen so far, and I still think he has some good years left. He's only in his 33 years old, but he seems to me like a guy who's totally checked out at this point.
32.
32.
It's not like he's 30. It's not like he's Chuck, who's on the back nine of his career, and this could be, his swan song and whatnot. When's his birthday? January 4th, so he's mid 32. It's not like he's about to turn 33. I don't know. It's total head-scratching situation. Makes no sense. It didn't make any sense when they signed him in the first place, but whichever way you slice it, man, I mean, it has just been an absolute disaster. And I do wonder if they end up trying to cut bait with him at some point or another because he's just taking up money. He's taking up space. And he's not really even contributing as a clubhouse guy, to my knowledge right now. So we shall see. But before we get out of here, my friend, thank you so much for joining me here on the Locked On Rockies podcast. Any expectations for you from the trade deadline?
Well, first of all, I'm looking forward to them getting German Marquez back in the next few weeks. Hopefully he can come back before the All-Star break, but I would like to see them make a move. Cal Quantrill's a guy who I've thought quite a bit about, and I think they could get a very good return for him. He's been terrific really all season. I think ERA of 3.5 right now. He would be a guy who I would look to trade for sure. Charlie Blackmon, Kyle Freeland are two other names I would consider, but Quantrill to me, I think is their best trade piece and a guy they could get a lot of prospects for, or a couple decent ones. But it seems like we say this almost every year with the Rockies at the trade deadline, going back to John Gray and Trevor Story and some of these other guys that they could have traded at the deadline, never did. But I think Quantrill's an obvious one to me where you can get some pieces and build for the future if you deal this guy, because he's been terrific from April to right now.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you whatsoever. I think if he can keep up his numbers over the next 3 or 4 weeks or so, he is going to make himself a very tradable asset, more so than he is now. So, all right, promise now, this is my last one because I told you I would ask you. What is Alex Becker's definition of success for the Rockies this season?
I would like to see some of the guys that have been on the injury list, just brought up Marquez, come back to form and get Kyle Freeland back to form. He's only made 5 starts this year. His ERA is over 9.5. I think for those two guys to come back and pitch well is important for the ball club going forward. Don't really have any expectations for the bullpen or the 100-loss season. It's almost a given at this point. I don't really care if they lose 100 or 95. What's the difference anyway? But some of the pitching and then the young hitters to keep developing. I'd like to see Tolia kind of find his footing as an everyday major league player. He's got 8 home runs on the year, so he's got a lot of natural power. And just for guys like Doyle and Tovar to keep progressing and moving forward, because they're actually part of the future in the next few years. And I'd say, yeah, Marquez and Freeland, and then the young guys offensively, just to keep developing and turn into solid everyday players.
Well said. I would agree with you on those fronts as well. But Alex, my friend, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Locked On Rockies podcast. It was an absolute blast. We'll have to do it again soon, whether it's on the postcast or I'll throw your name in the hat for Paul if he ever needs a guest as well to talk some Rocks. So I appreciate you, my man.
Enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. All right, that is going to do it for us on today's installment of the Locked On Rockies podcast. Make sure to smash that subscribe button. And once again, folks, be sure to check out that Locked On Denver Sports YouTube channel if you want some additional Rockies content. We'll put a bow on the week tomorrow on Friday, and Paul will get you back up and running on Monday. But for Alex Becker, I'm Aniello Piro signing off on today's episode of the Locked On Rockies podcast.